Policymakers of all stripes want to see lower rates of poverty and crime. Do certain life choices lead toward those two goals? Our next guest points to some encouraging data. Andrew Heath is a Superior Court judge and current director of North Carolina's Administrative Office of the Courts. He recently wrote about this issue at carolinajournal.com. The headline of the piece, Following the Success Sequence, is a path away from poverty and crime. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Mitch. Glad to be here.
So, the success sequence, what is that?
So it's really just a repackaging of traditional wisdom that has been, sort of middle-class norms that parents have handed down to their children as a way to live life and make major life decisions that will set you up for success. And so it was certainly parental advice that I received as a kid, but I think there's a disconnect now that some folks are not hearing this basic message. And the message of the success sequence is this: if you graduate and then maintain full-time employment and then wait until after you're married to have kids, if you're going to have kids at all, that sets you up for success, puts you in the best position for success.
And this is not just folk wisdom. You, in your article and in researching this for an academic degree, found that the research shows that this is true.
There's pretty strong research that points to that. And so this is not a concept that I came up with. I've stood on the shoulders of giants here. It first sort of appeared in 2006 when someone was writing about teenage pregnancy, and they found that teenagers at that point in the 90s had sort of lost or drifted away from the normal sequence of family planning, of waiting until after you're married to have kids, and some of the economic devastation that can cause in the lives. Teenage pregnancy is generally not a good thing. So that's where it first came up.
One of the things that's interesting about you writing about this, someone may be listening to us and saying, well, why is a judge or someone in the court system really focusing on this? As a judge, you have sort of seen some of the outcomes of people who have not followed this success sequence. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I've held court, superior court, so that's, high crimes all the way up to murder, superior court in 50 of our state's 100 counties. Both rural and urban. And so I've gotten a pretty good sampling of courtroom experience. And what I noticed was it was a high level of similarity from county to county with respect to the criminal defendants, and almost like a broken record. When a judge participates in a sentencing hearing, so that's someone who has either admitted guilt or been found guilty by a jury, and they're now receiving a sentence. Oftentimes the lawyer for the defendant will offer up life circumstances to explain the environment within which the offender committed these crimes as a way to seek a more lenient punishment from the judge. And so I would learn about the employment history, the familial status, the education level, and other things about these offenders, and it was like a broken record from county to county. And with that as a backdrop, I read an article by George Will about the success sequence, which explained that the data showed that people who had done those three steps were in a much greater position to escape poverty and in a much better position to make it into the middle class, regardless of where you start off in life. And so I wondered, the next move in this for me was, well, could following these three steps reduce the likelihood that someone might commit crime? And so that's what I really set out to explore.
Safe to say that the people coming into your courtroom and facing these circumstances, having the lawyer explain why things might have led them to commit these crimes, these were not people who got the diploma, got the steady job, and then got married before having kids?
By and large, and so on the last piece, it's they don't. Nobody's going to tell you that they didn't wait to get married before they had kids, but a lot of times in the paperwork in the file you can see whether or not someone's married and whether they have kids. So the timing is difficult, but by and large, these were not individuals who were following middle class norms, and there's a variety of reasons for that. But yeah, that was typically the case.
Before you were a judge, you also, for people who don't know, had an opportunity to be the state budget director. You worked for the governor, were the main person in helping to put together the budget document. You also reference in writing about this the fact that you saw in helping to put together these budget documents just how much money government spends to have to deal with the problems created when people don't follow this success sequence.
Absolutely. And so, as a judge and as a human being, seeing people in situations where they are more likely to commit crimes, your heart goes out to them. And unfortunately, as a Superior Court judge, when somebody is pleading guilty to, their third drug offense or something like that, you don't brush them aside, but that's not the place in their life where you're going to be able to make a really strong intervention. So I wanted to think about how do we do this? How do we attack this problem? And I think it really lies with younger people. And so I have a heart for these folks, but I know that just having a heart and doing the right thing doesn't always inspire action. And so I wanted to zoom out a little bit and say, not only can we help people at an individual level, but there could be some real cost savings involved if we are able to diminish crime. And so I looked at what is the Department of Public Safety budget on an annual basis. It's in the billions. How much do we spend for indigent criminal defense, the court-appointed lawyers? It's something like $130 million a year in this state. And these are just for state crimes that are committed. So there are not only just devastating personal consequences to crime, but huge systemic costs to our state.
You touched on this a few moments ago, but I want to get back to it, and that is, it's one thing to spell this out, this success sequence, and say, hey, this is something good that people should follow to help avoid the prospect of poverty and crime. But then the next step is, okay, so how do we ensure more people do this? I'm sure that's something you've been thinking about as you've been writing this. How do we make sure that we don't just say, hey, this is a good thing, but that people take it to heart?
Right. So that's the difficult piece, is how do you get this message out? And I'm hopeful that, first of all, there are much more talented and brighter individuals than me that have done a lot of work on this issue. Isabel Hawkins, Ron Haskins, Brad Wilcox at UVA, Wendy Wong at American Enterprise Institute, and they have some suggestions. And a lot of it, I think the best thing that could happen, the gold ring, would be to get it into education, into schools, and maybe as part of a health class where they're talking about sex and things like that, and to offer up the suggestion of waiting. Or maybe I believe there's some new standards about personal finance that are making its way into North Carolina high schools. Talk about the timing of these major life decisions and the economic impact that they can have on your individual life. I think those would be some natural areas. With respect to the courts, if we notice that there's a juvenile offender, that's a good intervention point. How do we make sure that recidivism rates go down? And I think one way is to arm these individuals that have interaction with the justice system, that they are in control of their life. Yes, there are obstacles, but these are things that they can do to improve their situation, even in a flawed system.
Seems to me that taking a closer look at this success sequence actually provides a good sense of hope, because it sounds as if there are things that you could do that really aren't all that difficult that could really set you up well for life.
I think so. And for some people, they are going to be difficult, right? If you're in a failing school district, you don't have a lot of parental guidance, that's going to be more difficult for you to graduate high school than it is going to be for a middle-class child who has more advantages, parental involvement, that sort of thing. But even what I talk about is this category of folks that I'll call the formerly poor. So just to back up a little bit, in 2017, Brad Wilcox and Wendy Wong, they looked at the Youth Longitudinal Survey, and that's about 7,500 people that were surveyed from time to time in regular increments from the time they were very young till the time they reached adulthood. And that is the subset of data that they used for their study on the millennial success sequence. And if you look at their data, about 25% of the folks who grew up quote-unquote poor were able to follow all 3 steps of the success sequence and reach that middle or upper income bracket, the middle or upper third of the income bracket. That's pretty remarkable. And you might say, well, that's only 1 in 4. But I think that's a statistically significant portion of that poor population. So if 1 in 4 are able to do it, what can we do as government, as society, to encourage that group to grow, to remove whatever obstacles there might be, and allow them to graduate from high school, maintain employment, and wait until after they're married to have kids? It sets them up for success, and I think it's a real winner, and I hope that we can get serious about answering some of those questions.
After looking at the numbers, after applying it to what you've seen in your own courtroom experience and in budget number crunching experience, are you hopeful about seeing the success sequence move forward as a tool that people use?
I'm hopeful. It has not garnered a lot of attention in academia or in policymaking. I think maybe the state of Wisconsin had one item in their budget a few years ago, and New York City may have had an ad campaign about it that didn't last very long. But I am hopeful. And so just moving the conversation from just income to crime, which is what I focused on, if you look at the individual components of the success sequence, education, employment, and family stability, marriage, do those independently offer a reduction in the likelihood of committing crime? And I was extremely optimistic with the research that's already out there about each of those subjects. If you graduate from high school and continue your education, every year of education that you complete has a huge reduction in your likelihood to commit crime. If you are employed, it has a big impact on your likelihood to commit crime. You're not going to risk losing your job to commit crime. You're not going to risk getting kicked out of school to commit crime. And then the same is true with family. If you have a spouse and that solid marriage relationship where you're accountable to your spouse, you're less likely to commit crime. And some really good studies out there that document that relationship in all 3 of those areas. So my hypothesis would be that if you add all 3 of them together, you're going to get that much more of a reduction in crime. So I am very optimistic.
You can learn more by going to carolinajournal.com and finding the column with this headline, "Following the Success Sequence is a Path Away from Poverty and Crime." Its author is Andrew Heath, Superior Court Judge and Director of North Carolina's Administrative Office of the Courts. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Mitch.